Today, the Australian people have voted for Australian values.
This is the most extraordinary election I've seen in my 5 decades. This is a turning point election for the country. Nobody predicted the scale of this result. It's transformed Anthony Albanese into a Prime Minister of immense authority and of long-standing significance. This Labor government will govern for a long period of time. It will put its stamp on the country in a pretty distinctive way, and it's left the Liberal Party in ruins. One of the questions, of course, is whether the Liberal Party is actually capable of recovery. If it is, that recovery will take many years. I mean, what's happened in this campaign is the country's moved to the left in economic, social and cultural terms. But I think Albanese will still want to govern from what he sees as being the Labor centre. The election was about cost of living, but this was really deceptive. This was a really deceptive issue because essentially, if you like, the Peter Dutton campaign was far too narrow. I mean, it almost got to the stage where the Liberal Party stood for cheaper petrol. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. The Liberal brand was lost. The sense of what the Liberal Party represents, what the Liberal Party stands for, was lost. It's one thing to say the issue is cost of living. We've got to introduce concessions, cheaper petrol and other changes in order to convince people we're concerned about cost of living and we want to look after them. But that only works if you've got a strong political brand behind it. I think what happened in this campaign is people didn't really know what the Liberal Party stood for. The Liberal Party forgot totally that the advice from John Howard that it needs to be a broad church. It wasn't. It ran on thin policies. It contracted the entire debate. So I think strategically and tactically, the Liberal Party misjudged, and in particular, Peter Dutton misjudged. I think we've got to be very careful about judgments in retrospect. I mean, it looked for quite a lot of the past term as though Peter Dutton was doing pretty well, particularly in terms of the polls in the latter part of last year. But that wasn't the case. Peter Dutton made some really significant mistakes. Firstly, I think he was trying to win on grievance. He knew there were 7 quarters of negative GDP per capita. This was the greatest fall in Australian living standards in half a century. So he thought he could win very much off the back of that. He thought the electorate was coming against Albanese with baseball bats. He misread that. That was wrong. It wasn't that bad. The second mistake he made was not to knuckle down and produce substantial opposition policies at a much earlier stage. He deferred the hard policy work, and what that meant was that when the campaign came, the Liberal Party, the coalition, were not ready, they were underprepared, they hadn't done the hard work, and they were brutally exposed on that front during the course of the campaign. There's only one way forward for the Liberal Party, and it's got to avoid any suggestion that there's a silver bullet on either the right or the left. The only way forward is to run a broad church. That is the John Howard philosophy. You've got to understand how the country's changing, and that means the Liberal Party's got to change, but it's got to change in terms of a broad church, being a party of both liberal and conservative traditions, and it's got to reinterpret what the broad church means for the decade of the 2020s. And in particular, that means it's got to address its fundamental identity problems with this country. In other words, it's got to rethink its identity from top to bottom. So I think it's going to be a very difficult, a very challenging and a hard road back for the Liberal Party. Now, Albanese knows that. I think the really interesting thing is whether Albanese succumbs to hubris. I don't think he will. I think he's more in touch with the community than people think. I think he's realistic. He doesn't have a huge ego about himself, and I think his judgment about government and stability and his capacity to read the Australian electorate is pretty impressive.